Oh, and I also should mention... Oh, and I should also... Hi, I'm Marcus and I play the Shakuhachi. So I made a few videos on some basic aspects of the Shakuhachi. I gave a general overview. I had my niece here to produce the first tone on the Shakuhachi, and I made a video on how to choose your first instrument. And somehow this turned into a Shakuhachi introduction series. So now the next part, the basic tones on the Shakuhachi. If you're interested in the Shakuhachi, you probably know that it is a pentatonic instrument. So we have 4 holes on the front and 1 hole in the back, and this allows us to make 5 basic notes. And today I'm going to explain a bit on how to produce these notes and on some basic practices. So let's jump right into it. The first note is where you close all the holes. So you can have your left hand on the top, or if you prefer, you can have your right hand on the top. As you can see, this is quite difficult for me, but some people find this more easy to do. It doesn't make any difference, so you can do it any way around you like. The standard way, if you don't have a preference, is to have your left hand on top. So the first note is to close all the holes. This is called Ro, and it sounds like this. The next note is called Tsu, and we just lift the lowest finger. Then again we lift the next finger up, and it's Re. Again the next finger up, this is Chi. Then we lift the next finger up, you might have already guessed it, but we close the bottom 2 holes. This is for the note Re. Closing these 2 holes at the bottom don't affect the pitch, but it makes the tone a bit more stable and it changes the tone color a bit. So if I play this with the holes open and with the holes closed, you maybe can hear that they are slightly different. But the pitch, even though I don't change anything else, the pitch is the same, but the tone color is a bit different. Okay, so that's already note number 5. So I said we have a pentatonic flute, so we have 5 basic notes. These are the 5 basic notes. Great. This is the first octave on the Shakuhachi. There are 2 main octaves. The lower one is called Otsu and the higher one is called Kan. And then there is a 3rd octave, which on most instruments you can't play all the notes, but only the lowest, maybe 2 notes, 2 full notes. But on modern Shakuhachi you can actually play all the notes in the 3rd octave as well. This 3rd octave is called Daikan, or Big Kan. So we have Otsu, sometimes also called Ryu, and then we have Kan, and then we have Daikan. So those are the 5 basic notes, but there is one more note that you should be aware of, and this is I. So we went up to Re, which is this fingering where only the thumb hole is closed and the bottom 2 holes are closed. And for I we just lift the thumb. This is the same pitch as the note that we started off with. So the same pitch as Ro, just 1 octave higher. However, there is a second way to produce the same pitch for I, which is playing Ro in the 2nd octave. So I is usually counted as being part of the 1st octave. Kan no Ro is counted as being part of the 2nd octave, the Kan octave. But the pitch is the same. So I can play it with this fingering here, or with the fingering for Ro. and this is exactly 1 octave higher than the note that we started out with. The note Ro in Otsu, so in the first octave. So this difference, or non-difference if you like, between Ro in the second octave and E in the first octave leads to an interesting aspect about the naming and about the notation of shakuhachi notes, which is that what is actually notated is not the pitch itself, like we do it in Western notation, but is the fingering. So the pitch here is the same. So in the West, we would just call this by the same note name. In this case, it is D, because this is a standard length shakuhachi, a 1.8 shakuhachi, so the bass note is the D. And then next octave higher is also a D. And then third octave is also a D. Okay, but the same pitch, Ro and E, so this is the same pitch, but the fingering is different. For E, only the bottom 2 holes are closed, only these 2 holes are closed, everything else is open. And for Ro, all the holes are closed. So basically, Ro means all holes closed and E means only the bottom 2 holes closed. If I take a different shakuhachi, so if I take a longer shakuhachi, the bass note here is A. The bass note is this. But when I close all the holes, this is called Ro as well, okay? Western pitch is A, whereas for the 1.8 flute it was D. Now we have A as the bass note. But when I close all the holes, this is called Ro. Again, this fingering here is E. Ro again. So the note names that I just told you for the 1.8 flute are the same names for this 2.4 flute, even though the tones, the notes are different. So Ro, lift one finger Tsu, lift the next finger Re, lift the next finger Chi, lift the next finger Ri, and then Ro or E. This is a video about the basic notes, so you will probably, when you start playing the shakuhachi, only be concerned with playing in Otsu, so in the first octave. So I'm just going to tell you now, and you can keep this for future reference, that the note names in the second octave, in the kan octave, are the same as in Otsu, except for the 2 highest notes. So we start with Ro, Tsu, Re, Chi, and then this note here we call Hi. One of the reasons is that the fingerings that you use for Hi and for the variations of Hi is often a bit different than the Ri in the lower octave. And then the highest note again is an E, like we have for the first octave. But if we go up to the next octave, Ro, this is actually not called Ro, so the third octave Ro is not called Ro, but it is called Go no Ha, because the fingering actually is a bit different. You close all the holes, but you open the back hole a bit. You play in a bit of a merry position. But again, if you start out, you don't need to be concerned about that. This is just to illustrate that most of the note names between the first and second octave are the same, except for the 2 highest notes, where it's a bit different. Oh, and I should also mention that the note names are Japanese syllables, and we use symbols from the katakana alphabet to write these notes down. Now you have the notes, you have the names, you have the fingerings. You can have a look at the fingering chart so that you know which holes to close. Now, how do you get to produce these notes reliably, right? This is the first big challenge for playing shakuhachi. You get your first tone, but then you want to produce stable tones. The most important practice for improving your shakuhachi skills is long note practice. And this is pretty much the same for all wind instruments. This means you just play long notes and you hold the note and you observe yourself playing the notes and see what fluctuates and how you can improve your playing and your technique. The basic practice that you really should start out with is that you take all the fingerings and you just play long notes with those. However, it's not equally easy to produce all of these notes. In particular, re and re or e are easier to produce than the other notes. So re again is this fingering. This is the fifth above the bass note, and this means that producing the air column inside the flute is a bit easier. The other one is E or Re, where you close the thumb hole. So these notes are a bit easier to produce. Generally, my recommendation for beginners is that you start with the higher notes and then you work your way down. So maybe start with the chi. Play that a few times. Then move down to the next lower note, which is re. Then try the next lower note, tsu, where you close the second hole. And maybe you notice, this is really difficult, or maybe you're not even able to produce a tone. That's totally fine. It just happens to everybody when you start out. So tsu doesn't work, so go back up. Try tsu again. And then go down to ro. And this is really the first basic exercise that you should do. And even after years of playing, I always start any practice that I do with long note practice, because this is the best way to improve my shakuhachi skills, as it is for everybody. And just as a footnote, the main practice for improving your shakuhachi skills and for warming up when you start practicing, for example, is the so-called Robuki, or blowing ro. This is just playing ro for 10 minutes, something like this. And you do that for at least 10 minutes a day. So this is mainly to illustrate that long note practice really is the best way to improve your shakuhachi skills. I think I've said this 5 times by now, okay, but it is really the best way. When you do this long note practice, in particular when you start out playing shakuhachi, you will notice that you will get dizzy very quickly. The reason for this is the reason that you get dizzy. You take in a lot of air and you use a lot of air, so your oxygenation level in the blood increases a lot. So if this happens, just stop for a while and then start again. Even after many years of playing, when I do really intense Robuki, I get dizzy every time. So this is just a natural part of the process and nothing to be worried about. Just before you faint, just stop playing for a bit and recover. Then the next step in the long note practice is that you should try to play at different volumes. When you play very quietly, you can hold the note for much longer, but you need more control. When you play the note very loudly, you use up your air very quickly, but it's usually a bit easier to produce a tone. And at the end of the day, you want to expand your range as much as possible so that you can play loud and that you can play quiet. So playing quiet notes. And playing very loud notes. That's about as much air as I have. Okay, next thing, when you do long note practice, you can also start practicing note repeats, which when you're playing traditional Japanese music, you don't use tonguing to start the note. So for Western flutes, what we do is, yeah, we use the tongue. When you repeat a note on the shakuhachi, you lift a finger. So again, let's start with re. This is a good exercise to add on to the long note practice. The important thing here is that you don't start alternating between the notes. Okay, this is not what we want, but we just want a quick break in the airstream to start the next note. And you can do this for every note, of course. So for ro, for tsu, re, chi, re, and back to ro. When you start playing your first basic notes, you will also notice that your pitch is very low. At least this would be very typical for a beginner. The reason is that it is easier to produce a note when your lips are closer to this part here, to the utaguchi. So when you play like this, rather than this is part of the so-called meri and kari on the shakuhachi, which is another very big topic. And I just mentioned this here to encourage you to find a reference for the correct pitch. Maybe you have a tuning meter, or maybe you have a tuned piano, preferably, that you can use to get the pitch. And when you find that you are too low, try to bring your head up and to increase the angle between the flute and your head. You will find that it is more difficult to keep the airstream, to keep the note, when your lips move further away from the utaguchi. This is why I'm mentioning this here. This is a good part to integrate into your basic note practice as well. But don't worry about the correct pitch too much at the start. I'm just mentioning this here because it is a good exercise to try to get your lips a bit further away from the utaguchi and to still be able to produce a tone. So those are the main points for producing the basic notes and some ideas on how you can practice this. This is a lot of stuff, I know that, and it's not easy to just do this. It requires a lot of practice, and not just many hours, it also just takes a certain time, weeks, months, before you really get this right and before you get the hang of it. There's a lot of experimentation. For shakuhachi playing, I personally think more than for most other instruments, it's that you really have to find your own way of playing as well. I always say it's very helpful to have a teacher, but not because the teacher can tell you exactly what to do, but because the teacher is somebody who has played for a while and has made his or her own experiences, and so can give you a few pointers on things that you can try. I'm always hesitant to sell myself as a teacher in these videos because it sounds like I have a vested interest in that you take lessons. But the main thing is really that, in particular at the start, playing shakuhachi can be quite frustrating because there are many things that you have to keep track of and that you have to coordinate. And it's really helpful if you have somebody there who has gone through the process and who can give you some tips on what to try. You still have to do the trials yourself, but it's always good to get some ideas and to get some feedback on what you can try. And it doesn't have to be a formal teacher-student relationship. If you know somebody who's played shakuhachi for a while, ask that person. He or she will be able to give you some tips, and this really reduces the frustration that you undoubtedly will experience when you start playing shakuhachi quite a lot. I hope you find this useful. Please let me know in the comments what you find useful, or maybe the aspects that you find still confusing, and I can talk about that in the future. And as always, at this point, my channel is still very new, so any subscriber is very much appreciated, and any like that you might give me for my videos is also very much appreciated. If you have questions or suggestions for future videos, please let me know. I'm not doing these videos for me, but to give something useful to you, so please let me know. Okay, I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!